Sir, introduce yourself and
Yes, sir.
give your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak today. Special thanks to Terry Holcomb, Director of Party Operations of the Republican Party of Texas, for taking the time to help with this issue. My name is Jeremy Osmus, and I'm a decorated retired Army officer with over 20 years of service and multiple combat deployments. In my career, I flew Black Hawk helicopters performing air assault and medevac missions. The relevance of my professional experience is important to keep in mind, having been entrusted to bear arms for over 20 years in service to my country. Today, I'd like to talk to you of my experience with a concealed carry permit. In December 2018, I submitted an application to DPS. I self-reported a diagnosis of PTSD, though it is not a disqualifying condition under the law. In March, my application was forwarded to DSHS Medical Advisory Board. Additionally, DPS sent a form that was to be completed and signed by a physician. My primary care physician signed her positive approval, and the form was sent to the medical board. In May, I received a determination notice stating I was found unfit by the board. My request for appeal and for the notes from the MAB was received by DPS on July 2nd. 7 months later, exceeding the 60 days allowed by the law, I received a notice that a hearing was set for the 22nd of January 2020. Only at the time of my hearing was I provided with the notes from the MAB indicating 2 of the 3 board members voted against me and that they had requested additional information to make their determination. During the first hearing, it became clear that DPS required a letter from a psychiatrist. I was given additional 10 business days to satisfy DPS, and the case was reset to February 5th. In retrospect, I agreed to an impossible task. No psychiatrist in Texas would meet with a person on an outpatient basis to make a determination in that short a time. I was able to see the same psychologist that gave me a diagnosis of PTSD, and he wrote a favorable recommendation to give to DPS. I prayed that would work. I forwarded that recommendation to DPS and was told that it would not suffice, as it was not written by a physician whose primary practice was in psychiatry. Yes, the same psychologist that diagnosed me was not able to make a recommendation in DPS's opinion. I was left to plead my case. During my court hearing, I asked that the case be dismissed, as it did not have a condition listed under the law. I was denied. I presented my physician's positive recommendations on the DPS form, but the DPS attorney stated the form was to be signed by a physician whose primary practice was psychiatry. The form makes no mention it can only be completed by a physician with those credentials. I argued the board members reviewing my case were not psychiatrists. One physician has been barred from practice, another an optometrist, but none a physician whose primary practice was psychiatry. I found it ridiculous that DPS trusted an optometrist over the word of a practicing psychologist. I argued I self-reported an error due to an ambiguous and complex question on the DPS application. I argued DPS had no right to add PTSD because it was not listed in the law. DPS stated it was added by the MAB and not them. DSHS, who conducts the MAB, claimed the forms are generated by DPS. Lastly, I've submitted a letter from a local mental health practice stating due to high demand, June was the earliest I could speak with a psychiatrist. In the end, my application was denied. Had I a lawyer, my outcome may have been different, but I do not have thousands of disposable dollars to fight DPS over my rights. My case may be over, but DPS can't be allowed to continue acting in such a capricious and arbitrary manner as it relates to this law. It is clear the addition of PTSD to their process directly targets veterans. It is well known that veterans are affected in greater numbers by this condition. It is approximately 260,000 of the nearly 1.4 million veterans in Texas are affected by PTSD. DPS is not acting in an appropriate manner when they seek to deny veterans and disabled veterans protection under this law. This legislation is clear, and it wasn't designed to do that. If DPS wants to add PTSD as it relates to the CHL licensing, they should appeal to the legislature and request the change. Instead, DPS has decided to hide in the shadows, make their own rules, and target veterans. DPS's actions only further escalate the stigma surrounding mental health. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Birdwell.
Mr. Chairman, I know with the invited testimony we've been asking questions as the witnesses. Do you want to wait till the entire panel, or?
If the senator has a question, we'll do it at that time. Thank you.
I just didn't want to, I wanted to defer to the chair. I didn't catch names.
It's hard to pronounce, sir.
Because my hearing aids work, but the acoustics in here are terrible, so without name tags. But first, let me say thank you for your service.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I thought I heard you say in your testimony that you had self-reported PTSD.
Correct, sir. Yes, I did.
Okay. is there a requirement to report either PTSD or some other mental health is not formally on the application? So you were being more truthful than required, is what I'm getting at.
Correct, sir. It's my understanding that in the past, the old form had these 6 listed diagnoses that they wanted reported. However, the new form, the language is, it's a very long paragraph, and it's very broad contexted. But what's most concerning is the paragraph that falls right below that, where they specifically state that any omission is a felony. And so with that in mind, you say, well, I don't have one of the 6, but I do have a condition that I am being treated for. Is it in my best interest to report that or commit a felony?
Okay. How were you made aware that the panel of examiners or the board, the 3 people that were reviewing your case at DPS, how was it through open records or something that one's an optometrist, one's a doctor who'd been suspended?
Correct.
I didn't think doctors who'd been suspended could practice, and I'm I mean, how did you find that out? Because I mean, that's so diametrically opposed. I'd be, if Director McCraw is listening and hearing this, I can imagine he is picking up the phone right now. So go ahead.
And I agree, it was very frustrating. I initially requested the information but never received it. On the date of my initial hearing on January 22nd of this year, I was given, the documents were provided for the judge, and I asked if I could have a copy of them. I was given a copy of them. I went home and I bounced those numbers off the Texas Licensure Board, and I found that one of those doctors was still practicing. They were practicing in the area of neurology. One doctor was not practicing, but still maintained his medical license. Not to say that at his age he can't practice, but this gentleman was in his late or mid 80s. Another one had applied for a license through the Texas board, but there was no determination made. And so I did a Google search, found out that he was a prominent ophthalmologist here in Austin. And then so I checked the Texas Optometry Board, and that's where I found his information.
Okay. I know what PTSD is, but you said there's 6 different categories. Did I catch that correctly? That there's 6 different categories of PTSD. Are those, mild to severe? I mean, look, now you don't need to know my personal story, but my wife likes the barbecue grill these days. Okay, I don't. Does that mean I have PTSD? Probably not. But how do we make sure? Because look, this is personal to you, and it's certainly personal to me. How do we make sure that the veteran is receiving the benefit of the doubt, and it is the state agency's requirement to prove,
right,
not to prove your unfitness, rather than your requirement to prove your fitness?
Right. Well, I'm sorry if I created the confusion. I wasn't speaking to 6 different levels of PTSD, though my diagnosis is considered minimal or minor. I was speaking to the 6 types of disorders listed by the legislature, none of which is PTSD.
Okay.
I want to say one of them was schizophrenia. There were a couple other ones listed. I have them in my bag. I can pull them out if you'd like me to read them.
The state has a legitimate reason to make sure that folks with a mental health issue aren't exercising, wielding firearms.
Yes, sir.
But we have an obligation to make sure that our duty is to protect your right, not to leverage it against you. And so that's why I'm digging into this, because I've seen other national stories and other places where the unintended consequences of what is happening to veterans, that I don't want to see that happen. So I'd be very interested. Get your contact information, and I can address this with Director McCraw. So
Can I make one comment to that, sir? I think that if the legislature wanted to add that, that would be something that you could discuss and argue amongst yourselves. But the fact that it was not added by the legislature and DPS has taken it upon themselves as a flag, so to speak, that they use, to me that seems outside of the direction that they were given or the duty they were meant to perform.
Yeah. They've hung an extra ornament on the Christmas tree that didn't need to be put there.
Yes, sir.
But I also want to make sure that if we're making mental health determinations, that it's mental health professionals, not an ophthalmologist. Although I've enjoyed the specialties of an ophthalmologist as well with eye implants, so there's some digging's got to be done here. So I'd like to get your contact information. So
Sir, I would love to give that to you, and I appreciate your time.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.